Well, good evening and welcome to a special edition of Tracking the Tropics. I'm meteorologist Brian Hutton Jr. in Raleigh, North Carolina. Hurricane Delta has made landfall in southwestern Louisiana. Delta is the fourth storm to make landfall in the state this hurricane season, which ties a record for Louisiana, and the 10th tropical system to make landfall overall in the U.S., breaking a record that was a tie back in 1916. We now stand alone. This was from earlier today. Hurricane Delta made landfall. Prior to that, parts of Louisiana, including Baton Rouge, dealt with localized flooding. Check this out. Standing water making some roads nearly impossible to cross. Residents in the area had to deal with water right at their front doorsteps. Emergency management crews had to perform multiple high water rescues overnight on Thursday into this morning. Now, earlier today, right before our own newscast began, this is what it looked like in Lake Charles, Louisiana. The resilient city is bearing the brunt of yet another direct hit from a hurricane. As you remember, just 6 weeks ago, Hurricane Laura pounded through Lake Charles, bringing with it winds of 140 miles per hour and a towering 17-foot storm surge. Tonight, we are going to be breaking down everything you need to know. Before that, though, we are going to join our sister station KLFY in their coverage of Hurricane Delta. Let's listen in.
And the fam and
it's been tough, but at the end of the day, we adapt and we overcome. And our job is to make sure that tomorrow is brighter. Every day is brighter. And we have a huge benefit going to Whittington Veterinary Clinic for a young guy that was killed that worked for me, Calix James Broussard, nicest kid you'll ever meet in your life. Anything over Rice Festival, after these storms pass,
right,
there's brightness on the horizon.
Well, that's what's, this weekend, Festivals of Cayenne, the gumbo cook-off. I mean, I know we're all ready to get back to normalcy, so I'm glad y'all have that going on. We'll link up in the future, maybe help you guys out with that for sure. It's something that I'd like to hang on. I know I was talking earlier, man.
Sir.
If you need a judge, I'm there for you. We can do it.
We got
Locked it down. It's official. It's on TV. I'll be there, of course. Happy to do it.
30 cook teams now. You have to taste 30.
Hello! There's a big John. Acadiana, look, here's the deal. The wind is rolling.
Get it, baby.
We're going to head inside. I'm Gerald. Go to Caleb on these 10. Point that way.
Thank you.
Point that way. Dude, don't show that.
Well, there you see some coverage there from Vermilion Parish, Louisiana. It's very Acadiana. If you've ever been to the area, you know what Acadiana is like. That is right in the heart of Cajun country. You can see those wind gusts picking up there during that live shot as they were interviewing that person there. And again, still a very dangerous situation. Delta has been weakening as it approached land. Latest advisory as of 8 o'clock. This is an intermediate update and a position fix update as well for the National Hurricane Center. Winds are 90 miles per hour, which means it is now a Category 1 hurricane and made landfall at 7 o'clock Eastern time as a Category 2 hurricane with winds of 100 miles per hour. It's still moving north-northeast at 14. Pressure is up to 971 millibars, and it's now centrally located 25 miles west-southwest of Jennings, Louisiana, which Jennings sits right about here on the map. We'll zoom in on that here in just a second. In fact, here we go. Here's our current wind gusts as reported from sensors in southwest Louisiana, those that still have power. And you can see this is still a very strong hurricane. In Lafayette, Louisiana, winds are currently gusting at 39. Just down the road in New Iberia, 86 mile per hour wind gusts. Jennings has a 78 mile per hour wind gust, 79 in Lake Charles. Of course, they're still dealing with the impacts from Laura 6 weeks ago. You can see that basically right along I-10, which runs from Lafayette to Jennings to Lake Charles, is where the northern eye wall is sitting, and that's where the strongest winds are located. You see even just offshore, winds still 79 miles per hour out of Bowie offshore, a wind gust of 81 miles per hour in Beaumont, Texas, so they're not in the eye wall. So still extremely strong hurricane with wind gusts still up to over 80 miles per hour. Again, maximum sustained winds are clocked here at 90 miles per hour. So here's the current track of where it is. And again, the center moved onshore just 10 to 12 miles east of Cameron, Louisiana, which is where Laura made landfall 6 weeks ago. Again, the center is nearing the I-10 corridor. You can see plenty of rain. Flash flood warnings are in effect, stretching from Lafayette back over towards Lake Charles and then southward down towards some of the lakes in the inland watershed areas there. In fact, even flash flood warnings all the way out into Beaumont, Texas. You notice, though, that the eye is kind of lost some of its shape. I've been noting that over the last really few hours on radar that we really don't see a southern eye wall anymore. This has become very northern eye wall dominant as the southern eye wall has kind of opened up, as not only is the storm weakening, it's also beginning its extratropical transition, meaning it's starting to lose its tropical characteristics as it interacts with strong wind shear, and now over land it doesn't have that warm water to deal with either. Here's the current forecast track for Delta. Again, it's forecast to weaken down to a tropical storm overnight into tomorrow and then become a tropical depression or extratropical as we head through the weekend. And most of the rain associated with this will be on the northern and eastern side of this. For those of you here in central North Carolina, most of the heavy rain will be staying off to the west of the mountains, but still plenty of rain coming across portions of the southeast. We'll be talking more about that here in just a second. Here is a comparison of these two tracks, the most recent storms to make a landfall in Louisiana. Louisiana has had 4 landfalls this year. It had Cristobal earlier this year. It then had Marco, which clipped portions of southeast Louisiana. Laura, of course, the big storm, which was Category 4, and now Delta. You can see here how close in track these two hurricanes are and were. Laura, again, made landfall in Cameron, Louisiana. Delta came on shore about 10 to 12 miles east of that in portions of Louisiana. So a very close track to each other, which means, again, the exact same areas that are still recovering from Laura are dealing with the impacts now of Delta as it moves on shore. One of the reasons why Delta began weakening, besides wind shear, is water temperature. Down into the Gulf of Mexico and the Central Gulf, where it re-intensified to a Category 3 hurricane just yesterday, water temperatures are in the low 80s. That's conducive for tropical development. Closer to shore, water temperatures are in the upper 70s. That's cooler water, and a hurricane won't be able to maintain intensity with those cooler waters, and it begins weakening, and that's what we have seen with Delta. So some good news with this for Louisiana is it was weakening, but still plenty of storm surge, plenty of heavy rain, and plenty of wind with this as well. There's one other system I want to note here that we are tracking in the tropics. This is a tropical wave that's emerged off the coast of Africa and is moving westward towards the Lesser Antilles. The National Hurricane Center gives us a 20% chance of developing over the next 5 days, but it does look like as this approaches the Lesser Antilles that wind shear will pick up and this should be torn apart. So I'm not expecting this to become anything. It's something to watch. But at this point, it doesn't look like it's anything that we'll have to be concerned with. But of course, anything that's in the Atlantic, we are keeping our eyes on. We'll talk more about Delta now and some of the inland impacts. Joining me, our guest tonight, is WRBL's chief meteorologist, Bob Jeswold. Bob, we talked to you back in July about notable A-name storms. It's hard to believe now we're in the Greek alphabet of named storms. So let's get to Delta, of course, our Greek name now. What are you expecting in western Georgia and eastern Alabama from this system?
A severe weather setup. And here's the thing, it's incredible, as you just pointed out, historical. Since 1916, they have 10 tropical systems making landfall. Louisiana's seen just enough. Enough is enough already. And again, now the surge they have. Well, as it comes in, unlike what we had with Sally. Here's something interesting. Sally, we had a rescue. We had a swift water rescue in Barber County in Clayton, Alabama, which was in the central part. And it happened at night. A bridge was overtaken, obviously, from the swollen tributaries, and the repeated amount of rainfall. The rain won't be our problem. It's a severe weather setup, very similar like you would have in a November severe weather outbreak. But we showed you the latest from Creel, of course, the storm surge potential. That's really where all the inland issue seems to be, as you were just talking about. Some pockets there when it just came on shore. It was about 9 foot above ground. And there were some buoys earlier in the day where the eye wall actually passed over right in the Gulf of Mexico, picking up a 35-foot wave. That's just hard to comprehend. Well, look at all the flooding that's going on. That's what's happening inland right now. That's what we know of. And, of course, the high surf still pounding from Cameron off to the east there where it made landfall at 100-mile-per-hour winds is a Category 2. It was a weak Category 2, but don't let it fool you because this is how it's going to impact us inland now. It's the wide diameter. It's the amount of real estate that this will be impactful to. Despite the winds, you're looking at just a broader reach with these outer bands that come in at a certain angle that can actually pose more of a risk for some severe weather and some inland flooding that could take it all the way into central Louisiana. So Louisiana is really ground zero when it comes to the flooding. From Baton Rouge, look at already nearly 9 inches of rain has fallen in the past 36 hours and even more to follow. But as it quickly ejects north, we don't even have a trough. This is the problem here. We don't have that trough of low pressure to kick it quickly, to accelerate it. So it's just trucking along faster than Sally at least, but it's the high pressure in the western periphery that has been guiding it all along. So at this projected path, at this exact area, the angle will create some issues for us. Let's talk about the satellite and radar, how it's coming and how we're watching it. Tonight, we're not seeing anything severe, but we've been seeing moderate to heavy rain. We've seen plenty of car accidents this morning on some of the local highways. Many people weren't expecting that torrential rain coming in with those bands. And when that happens, you get a lot of hydroplaning. So we found that out with 20 reported accidents just for the city of Columbus, Georgia alone, not even in the greater Columbus area. So as it continues to ride right along this, you could see its projection. It's still going to have wind issues. There's going to be power outages across Mississippi. Areas around Mississippi, even coming in Sunday morning as it quickly ejects out of here as a depression, will eventually be able to see some relief once it gets into the mid-Atlantic and Ohio Valley. Now, the wind forecast, still we have to watch this all the way through Mississippi, Natchez Trail, Vicksburg, into the capital, Mississippi alone, with winds that will be creating a lot of problem, and the tornado threat. That's what we're talking about. As the winds start to weaken, we are going to get in on some of that action of the tornadoes. But the watches and warnings for tropical storm warnings will still continue, even with the salt water ushering of more water piling up behind it, even though it has made landfall. But when it moves even farther inland, we still got the winds to deal with. We even have some eruption of cells from the actual Delta's band. Let's talk about it first. For Saturday, we look around areas around Tupelo. Hey, Oxford, Mississippi, starting that game there. Alabama, of course, playing Ole Miss, and that game has been lifted a little bit later in the day, an hour and a half later, so around 6:30 Central Time. And that's good because for them, they would be dealing with some of the severe weather threat from Columbus, Mississippi, through parts of western Alabama, cutting very close to our area now. And even though we're under a marginal risk on a scale 1 to 5, that's the lowest level, wait till I show you some of the new graph models that we have proprietary to here that will tell a different story. And it starts with the temperatures. We have a lot of buoyant air. We have a lot of 70s out there, and these readings will not change at all in the overnight. So we're going to have a prime atmosphere with a lot of available energy that's going to help dynamically lift the air. So you have what you would typically see in a severe weather season, okay? And then you factor in the radar forecast models. We start all the way through western Alabama, where I showed you the slight risk, from the Storm Prediction Center, ramping it up more to see a tornado threat. So this is what we're saying. This area here would likely see from Montgomery back off from Interstate 65 into Columbus, Mississippi, that threat of maybe seeing some strong winds coming in. Now, tonight they're not as bad, but let me show you as we get into Saturday morning. Here comes an area that we have to watch for. Here's that one outer band, pretty dynamic, definitely. What happens here is acritical if we start seeing independent cellular development. That's what we're looking at. Although the threat may be low, as we showed you, the models tell a different story. So we're kind of betwixt. We're somewhere in between here where we will begin to see some rotation potentially at that angle of tropical storm still at Saturday afternoon Delta as it's coming in across Mississippi, which is over here on the west part of your screen. So this is what we're going to be watching, this kind of setup at 3:30 in the afternoon. We stop it here. Could Atlanta see some torrential rain? Absolutely. Probably some local street and flash flooding. But again, nothing like what we've seen with Sally coming into play. These last two rounds have been a little bit less dynamic, but we're still watching it even through central Georgia coming in at night on Saturday evening. So again, watching for these little convective type showers. You can still have rotation with them, even with a very strong outer band, still Prague to come through central Alabama on Saturday night. So the setup, again, would have to be a real watch and see. The good news is, here we come Sunday morning, and by this point, we begin just to see some of the wraparound moisture as it lifts farther north and east through Birmingham and through central Alabama. And Georgia's still seeing some of that dynamics in the morning, but through the overnight, you lose some of that energy, the daytime heating, so to speak. So tomorrow, it's all wait and see. By Monday, look at this. We just see some clouds overspreading here. We do have a cold front that hasn't even approached yet, but by Tuesday, we'll see that happen. So one more wrap-up, again, on Delta. As Saturday morning approaches, coming in after midnight, local time, central time, around, this will be at 2 o'clock Eastern time, you could see the wind still at 70 miles per hour, just an 85-mile-per-hour gust. That's the number underneath it. So we are still looking at a very strong tropical storm at this juncture. Tropical storm coming up, as I said, across parts of the Mississippi Delta as we get into tomorrow sometime in the afternoon. And then that's what we have to watch for the dynamics of how the wind is starting to come in southerly, but at the same time, you're getting a good kick from those outer bands, and how that intersects at that angle could bring in what we would call possibility of seeing some of those spin-up, weak rotating tornadoes. And you can get tornadoes sometimes, EF2s. We've seen them before. But again, we're thinking they're still going to be weak. There could be some damaging wind if any of these elevate enough. And all that warm, buoyant air, why not, right? That's what we're saying. So wrapping it up again, you can see clearly Saturday, we're still talking about a tropical storm. As we get into later part of Saturday night into very early Sunday morning, we're dealing with a depression up in this area here, and there's still going to be, didn't even mention power outages, but be prepared for that across portions of Mississippi into Tennessee because of that persistent wind. Here's a local look here. This is from earlier, and we were looking at that outer band that came through on our live radar. And as we see it now, we were looking at some of this energy farther north, and that's pretty much it. This is a live radar return out of Peachtree City. As we see the sweep coming through, and none of this is severe at all. In fact, we've only seen very little rainfall, up to maybe a ½ an inch of rain since this all started this morning, the rain. So we're doing okay and giving it plenty of time for runoff. It's just tomorrow at times, some of this could become quite heavy. The NOWAD radar shows you kind of more of the picture, what we're looking at as far as over the last 5 minutes of data collected as it lifts up. So there's been some moderate embedded showers in Eclectic, in Montgomery. You can see that thunderstorm flash in there by that little squiggly line. That's what that is. The reds are obviously the very heavy rain. So it's been halfway decent. Games were interrupted temporarily. We had our Friday night games pushed to Thursday, the majority of them, because we're anticipating this. But the rainfall, again, look where it's going to be falling, right along that depression track. And we're worried more about the northern mountains of Georgia, our parts of the Carolinas, and, of course, northern Alabama and back into Mississippi, where there will be copious amounts of rain coming up as we get into even, this is actually Sunday, but Monday this should all be over. But you could see the end result farther south, seeing less across the region that I'm talking about. And, again, it's beneficial because what happened with Sally, we actually had 9, 10 inches of rain in that area there where we had bridges that were washed away and asphalt ripped off the foundation and cars that were swept away, and nobody was seriously injured, and that was really good news to report then. We get in our Saturday forecast then, so kind of what we're looking at is these temperatures here in the deep south and east central Alabama, west central Georgia, still holding in the 80s. So again, we're watching the temperatures. We don't see any forecast of any sunshine at all. So, again, that helps a little, but we're still talking about a very warm overnight and a lot of convective available potential energy, or CAPE, which will sustain any of these independent cells ahead of that outer band. So there you go, guys. I mean, it's just been a kind of an interesting setup. It is much different than Sally, and it is much different than Laura for us here in the region by way of its broader outreaching bands that have a little bit more dynamics, despite the fact that even though it was a weak Category 2 at 100-mile-per-hour winds, as it still sustains that right now over the coastal areas of Louisiana and lifting northeast, we just got to keep that in mind, never get complacent. So that'll be our afternoon setup for tomorrow.
Yeah, those rain bands can be especially tricky. You know, even with the primary rain band, especially if that detaches and kind of drifts eastward towards you guys, that can definitely be a big problem, as you mentioned, with the tornado threat. And so you mentioned Sally, as you were talking about. Obviously, Sally is the most recent one to impact you guys directly. How have you been advising viewers, as they're obviously just now kind of getting over Sally only a couple weeks ago? So what has been your messaging to try and stress to people that this isn't Sally, but to still take it seriously?
It's the severe weather setup. I mean, Sally had it, but Sally was all about, and you guys do the same thing, of course, from NCN and all our other stations that are watching right now. It's weather aware. We have the weather aware plan, and it was all about flooding in that one. It was all like, we're going to have flooding, and we did, south and east of the Columbus, Georgia area across east central Alabama. This one poses a different risk. It's by way of it coming in. It's coming in a little faster. Sally was slow, which brought in repeated training effect of rain. It's over the same areas over and over, same track. So you had all that runoff and, of course, river flooding and tributaries backing up. But this poses that angle effect, that angular effect where those outer bands come in, and by golly, then you start talking about what's going on now. We're going to be looking at potential seeing some tornadoes that could spin up. Although it is very low on the scale, it's still there, and that's why we got to keep that watchful eye. Hence, we're seeing not only that, the flooding at the coast we go to the severe weather risk in yellow, which is a 2 out of 5. And that means that could change, could it not? But we never get complacent, because if those bands and those independent cells that we were seeing kind of rotating in this area here would pose that risk. So that's the difference, frankly, between Sally that we're looking at and, of course, what we're talking about right now in that forecast as far as East Central Alabama starting first, that could potentially see what erupts ahead of Delta's stronger outer band tomorrow afternoon.
Yeah, definitely. It's been a long season too, and each storm has been similar but different. And you've been obviously tracking these storms, especially there in East Alabama, Western Georgia, for a long time. Obviously, this season is historic, but from your eyes, what is the most lasting impact we've seen so far from the 2020 season?
It's just the forecasted on target. I believe it was Dr. Klotzbach, and even NOAA too, but Dr. Klotzbach out of UCAR, at the University of Colorado, was pretty much on point of seeing how active it would become. In fact, maybe even exhausting our typical alphabet. And, at first it was kind of, many of us were like, we'll kind of see. But it has been just the weariness. It's just people get just tired after a while just watching this, but you don't want to let your guard down. I think that's kind of long-lasting impact where people think, well, hey, we went unscathed here. This part of the viewing area didn't have the flooding. We really, Bob, you did say there could have been tornadoes with Sally in the last one, Laura a little bit, but again, it's when you just say after a while, I'm done with this. We've seen it, and it didn't really happen. It'll be that one shot that we'll have, and that's kind of the impression that I think everybody in the area has seen. And even us, we've been tracking the tropics here this season, and this one has been obviously one for the record books, obviously with the 10 landfalling ones. Hey, again, 2018, we had a Category 3, a major in the month of October. Michael, but it was 150-mile-per-hour winds. It even clipped our southeast viewing area in Sumter County. People remember, that was just 2 years ago, albeit this is totally different. It's farther away. It is not a major hurricane making landfall or inland like it was for Michael after it was reassessed later for the winds. But again, 155-mile-per-hour winds, I'm going to correct myself here, as it was ramped up to Cat 5. That was it. And so this has been one for the record books. People have even recognized the fact that this is just too much. I mean, have we ever seen it? And it begs a question. I mean, is it the sea surface temperatures? Is it, we don't get into the political debate at all with politics, but we look at the straight up science in the middle here at News 3. And the straight up science will tell you, again, that obviously, we know that sea surface temperatures seem to really give them an accelerating effect, as we saw earlier this week. I mean, when it was in the Caribbean. I mean, it went from a Cat 1, Cat 2, boom, major hurricane. We're talking about this all in an hour's time. And they're developing in the Gulf of Mexico. These are not even tropical waves off Africa. So the Gulf has been quite active, and people are wary, I understand, but let's be mindful of what we can certainly expect here coming up tomorrow afternoon. And who's wary is us, because we're going to sit here all afternoon and we're watching this, and then what actually happens doesn't happen. That's okay, but we're prepared, and that's what it's all about. The setup is there, and that's why we're weather aware down here in the Deep South.
Yeah, definitely. As you were mentioning, and I saw you mention also earlier this evening, it is almost a severe weather setup for almost like a November setup of severe weather across the Deep South. You just get a strong cold front, and you get the secondary tornado season that develops across the Southeast. And as we're still October, which is normally a dry time for the Southeast, right? Normally this is one of the driest months across the Southeast. So, and you've dealt with Sally now, you're about to deal with Delta. What has been, again, it's been a long season, but what has been kind of your viewers' take on not just the hurricane season, but what the effects you guys have been dealing with inland? Or you find people being more aware, maybe because it's coronavirus and so there's nothing else to do? Have people been receptive to the message, or have people been, because of dealing with Sally and Michael a couple of years ago, more afraid of impacts from these systems?
I think that's a great question. I think our local EMA has done a great job on both sides of the river. And we, of course, forecast here in East Central Alabama and West Central Georgia. It is. The COVID has played a real integral part of this, because planning on this, people have been very good in asking us, the newsroom, and we've done many stories on it, like, where do we go? What do we do with COVID? How do we respond when we go to our safe place? You know, Mr. Jeswell, when you're talking about potential tornadoes, if there's a watch or warning, the shelters open up. How do we handle that? You wear the mask, you do just what you would do any other time. But they've been asking those questions, and they've been on top of it. And although we haven't had to really exercise, I think a couple, maybe once, twice, we go back to the 31st of this month, March 3rd of this year, we actually had tornadoes during COVID. And then as we were getting before the tropical Atlantic hurricane season, we had another outbreak on the 31st. And I know that people did a really good job. And according to EMA, they were great. So I would say to answer now, fast forward in the tropical Atlantic season, it's been unprecedentedly busy, is that they are ready. They are prepared. They know not to be too concerned. They know exactly what to do if they have to seek shelter, if anything was to become more violent or aggressive. We're going to update everybody on the hour tomorrow morning. We'll start with our morning meteorologist. She'll let everyone know on social and on web. And you know, and if things change and improve, that's good, and you don't have to implement the plan. But if we do come under a tornado watch, and I do believe Birmingham, Alabama, the WUFO, the Weather Forecast Office there at KBMX, has been talking about, you know, with this SPC, do we kind of look at Northwest Alabama into tornado watch area? We're going to watch that, and then we'll see how it behaves later. But to answer your question again, I think people, surprisingly, because I feel like we're experts now on COVID-19, and we've been dealing with this since March, for crying out loud, that they've already had to, because we had a couple severe weather outbreaks this spring that were pretty significant, and they were able to implement that plan, so therefore they have been ready for action in this tropical Atlantic season.
Yes. Don't miss the tornado outbreaks down there in Mississippi and Alabama, that is for sure. They give the planes a good run for their money, that is for sure. If you've never been to Mississippi and Alabama, they have some big ones down there, just like the planes. Some years more than. So that's WRBL's Chief Meteorologist, Bob Jeswell. Bob, thanks for spending part of your evening with us. We appreciate it, and hopefully you have a very quiet day tonight and tomorrow as well.
We're hoping so. As long as this line doesn't kick up too much. This last model run now is looking it's behaving a little bit more now. But it's been the model, as you know, this is that new IBM model, the graph model, and it's been a little bit better than her, but it's doing its own little thing. But it's been flip-flopping, so I'm not closing my eyes just yet, going to bed. We're going to be on this.
Yes, it has done a good job up here as well, so that's definitely true. Yeah. Thanks a lot, Bob, and good luck down there as well. Hopefully you have a very quiet day tomorrow. So again, Delta is now on shore. Delta will continue moving inland. Of course, we will continue to have coverage not just here in Raleigh, but also all across next our nation. WFLA will continue having coverages through the day tomorrow. And of course, your local station as well will be keeping you updated with the very latest. Hopefully, this is the last major storm we see this year. Hurricane season, though, does go until November 30th. There is still a lot of season left. We are still technically in the climatological peak season. We don't come out of that until about October 15th. And this is the only other thing, though, we're watching. That's good news. Hopefully the Atlantic starts quieting down, because I think I can speak for all of us. It's been a long hurricane season with everything else we've been dealing with. Again, 10 landfalling hurricane tropical systems. That is now a record 5 landfalling hurricanes. That ties us for a very active season. Last time we had 5, I believe, was 2005, which is not the record, but it's up there. And again, we're trekking towards our record names. Hopefully, though, we're done with that portion as well. But even if we're not, we will continue to be tracking the tropics. So thank you for spending part of your night with us. With Hurricane Delta not done with landfalls this week, we will be back tomorrow. Again, WFLA will continue to have coverage for you on their Facebook page and, of course, streaming across all of Next Our Nation. We'll be back with our regular edition on Tuesday at 8 o'clock with Chief Meteorologist Wes Hohenstein. I'm Meteorologist Brian Hutton Jr. live from Raleigh, North Carolina. Have a great rest of your evening.